r/NoSleep. Posted by u/astro, nastro_. I discovered the first real evidence of an afterlife. My name is Chris, and I'm currently a student attending North Dakota State University, majoring in information technology. I recently acquired an internship with one of the psychology professors, Dr. Johnson, at the school. I know I'm not in the psychology field, but I do have an interest in it, and to my surprise I actually got the internship. I like learning about new things, especially things that delve into the human mind. Dr. Johnson was just like me in that aspect, and that's how I found out about his internship. I normally wouldn't go out of my way to do an internship on top of my already existing job in school, but Dr. Johnson was paying me $50 every Thursday night to help him out with his experiments. I usually get off of work at around 4 p.m. and make my way to his lab on the school campus at around 5 p.m., which usually only lasted until 6:30 p.m. The internship itself was relatively simple, and honestly quite easy. I had very repetitive tasks to do each time I came in, such as cleaning the lab equipment, helping carry in boxes, and assisting him with anything else he needed. I didn't know much about Dr. Johnson, but what I did know was that he was a very smart man. I also knew that he had recently lost his wife due to a car wreck a few months back, before the school year. He didn't really show his emotions on this matter, and I never asked him about it. He was very scatterbrained and was always kind to me. To be honest, I really had no idea what he was even doing most of the time when I was working with him, mainly because I wasn't the smartest in the bunch, but more so because he would build things that made no sense to me. By this point, I had been working with Dr. Johnson for about half the semester, leading me into mid-November. Each Thursday night that I came in, he would be working on some new piece of some mechanical puzzle. These so-called pieces that he'd build would consist of different varieties of wires that were casted into metal bits which were surrounded in a metal coffin. He would have me carry in new parts, every time, which I saw as junk. I never actually said that to him, but he once told me that everything that we were doing here would be revolutionary and that it would change the world forever. One time, he even had me bring in a metallic plate which he then soldered onto 4 metal pawls which were standing on 4 respective wheels. I wasn't sure what he wanted to do with this component to the greater puzzle, but I helped anyway. It was now December, and I came in at the usual time. Dr. Johnson was there, already early and working away on his devices, as he normally was. He looked up to me with a smile and greeted me in a calm voice. Dr. Johnson: "Hello Chris, welcome back." Chris: "Hey doctor, how's the night been? Any new progress?" Dr. Johnson: "Actually, yes, I have. I've made some major modifications to some of the parts, and I think we're close. I think we'll be done by the end of the semester. It makes me so happy. Doesn't that make you happy, Chris?" I actually wasn't happy about this, because that meant that I wouldn't be making any more easy money. But I was definitely happy for him because he'd been working tirelessly all semester to create whatever he had been working on. It seemed like all his hard work was finally coming close to paying off. "Chris, actually, I was going to ask you about that. What is it that you've been working on all this time? Is it some medical device, maybe a new X-ray machine?" Dr. Johnson: "No, it's so much more." At this point, he had already assembled most of the machine, with a few parts yet to be added. From what I can tell, it clearly resembled your standard magnetic resonance imaging, MRI, machine that you'd find in most hospitals. Except, this one was much smaller. It was made up of what seemed to be random bits of rusted metal that looked forced together. It sure as hell didn't look comfortable either. I wasn't very happy with the vague answer that Dr. Johnson had provided me with, but I didn't really care all that much anyways. He then looked up at me with an enthusiastic expression and spoke to me. "Dr. Johnson, we are so close to making history, Chris. We just need one last component, another human." Chris: "Like another intern, or assistant?" Dr. Johnson: "Yes. We need another assistant to help us out. Go find someone that you know, it could be practically anyone. Also, for some incentive, tell them that I'd be paying them $100 for 1 day of work." I agreed and did as he asked of me. I went out the following Friday and asked one of my classmates if they'd be interested. His name was Jared, and frankly I didn't know much about him. We had worked on a few projects together this semester, but other than class, I didn't ever see him. He reluctantly agreed as he was in dire need of some money. I didn't really stop to question why Dr. Johnson would need a last-minute assistant to help out with the remaining few nights we had with him. Nonetheless, I texted him, telling him that I had found someone who was willing to help out with his project. He thanked me and told me to meet him back at the campus with Jared tomorrow night. This was definitely odd to me, as the campus is closed over the weekend. Plus, this wasn't our regularly scheduled meeting day, which added more to my confusion. I told him that I'd be there, and while simultaneously telling Jared about Dr. Johnson's new plan. Jared told me that he has to do something tomorrow night, and so I relayed the information back to the doctor. He then texted back, telling me he'd offer both of us $500 each for us to come in tomorrow night. I was astonished by his reply, but also a little bit happy. I told Jared, and in his greed, he finally agreed to join us. Saturday night came, and I was running a little late to the lab. Once I finally made it to Dr. Johnson's lab, I saw him doing some final tweaks to his fully formed machine. But something was off when I saw him. I walked further into the room, only to see Jared already there, except Jared was laying on the metal sheet that was inside the machine. His eyes were closed, and he wasn't moving. He also wasn't wearing any clothes except for a pair of white underwear. Dr. Johnson finally noticed me walking in, and clearly noticed my confusion. "Dr. Johnson, come in, come in. We're getting ready to activate it for the first time." "Chris, what is Jared doing in there? Is he all right, doctor?" "Dr. Johnson, yes, he's fine. I assure you, he agreed to do this." "Chris, what exactly did he agree to do anyways?" "Dr. Johnson, that doesn't matter right now, what matters is getting the device up and running. Here, help me get these plugged in." He gestured towards a tangle of wires that were connected to a set of monitors on a nearby desk. We began plugging these screens and other devices into the machine that housed Jared, until I noticed that Jared had not moved even an inch since I arrived. Was he unconscious? He looked almost pale, and unwell. The doctor then looked up at me with a sinister grin. He chuckled while speaking his next words. "Dr. Johnson, it's finally ready. We've finally completed the device after many long months. Chris, thank you so much for being here tonight. I wanted you to be the one to witness this. It truly warms my heavy heart knowing that you will be here alongside me to witness history." "Chris, it's no problem, really. I practically didn't do anything anyways. I was just here for the ride." "Dr. Johnson, you did more than you know." After he said this, he pressed a button on one of the monitors, and the lights in the room began to flicker. The device that the doctor had been working on for so long began to vibrate while making noises. I looked at the two monitors that stood before us. One of them had a bunch of data and nonsense that I didn't really understand. But the other monitor was filled with static, the kind that old TVs used to have when there was no input plugged in. Dr. Johnson and I both held our breaths as we anticipated results. Suddenly, the second monitor began to show signs of video. It showed a black and white video, which seemed to be of Jared walking around a field of flowers with the sun shining on him. I was surprised that there was some kind of video coming from that machine, but even more confused how it was doing this. Dr. Johnson began to cry tears of joy. He kept uttering the same words over and over again. "It worked, it worked, it worked." I was confused, and worried for my classmate. I spoke up to the doctor, cutting him off from his words. "Chris, what is this? What are we looking at right now?" He didn't reply. "Chris, doctor? Hello? Please, answer me." I practically began screaming my words until he finally looked at me, eyes still filled with tears of joy. Then suddenly, he hugged me. Not in the way you hug an acquaintance, but in the way you'd hug a long-lost friend or a family member. He released me from this hug, while speaking once more. "Dr. Johnson, we did it, Chris. Thanks to our hard work, I finally have my answer. I finally know where my wife is." "Chris, what do you mean?" "Doctor, she's not here, she's dead and has been so for a while now." "Dr. Johnson, no Chris, she's alive. Not here, but somewhere else." He pointed at the monitor that was showing Jared, still in that field running around blissfully. "Chris, with Jared? Where's that exactly?" "Dr. Johnson, he's there. Jared is truly there. And so is my lovely wife." "Chris, where? What do you mean, doctor? Where is Jared?" "Dr. Johnson, they're in paradise. My wife and your friend have both made it to paradise." The doctor began reaching under the desk and into his bag. He was searching for something, until he finally found it and pulled it out. It was a gun. I stepped back and my heart began to beat fast at an accelerating rate. He looked up to me, and I spoke with an almost cry in my voice. "Chris, what are you doing?" Dr. Johnson began to smile as he turned to look at me. He lifted up his right hand that was holding the gun and pointed it directly into the side of his head. "Dr. Johnson, I'm going to paradise." I screamed with all my might, pleading with him in a shaken voice. "Chris, don't do it. Professor, please. Don't do." And before I could muster the last word, he clenched his left fist while squeezing his right index finger and pulled the trigger. I heard a loud bang that made my ears ring, and I saw Dr. Johnson's now lifeless body falling to the floor. Blood now covered my face as I began to scream in a wretched tone, my voice trembling as I did so. I was mortified by what I had just witnessed. I fell to my knees and began sobbing. I don't remember much of what happened next. A janitor who worked weekend nights at the school heard the gunshot and reported it to the police. When they arrived, they found me lying on the floor, still horrified by what had just happened. They took me down to the station and I told them everything that I could remember, which they ended up filing down as an apparent murder-suicide from Dr. Johnson. To this day, I am still shaken up by what happened that night, because I now know what lies beyond our mortal lives, and I now have the first piece of evidence of an afterlife.